Welcome. My name is Michele Root-Bernstein, and I will be introducing you today to this panel and its panelists. Today you'll hear from scholars approaching the subject of polymathy from a variety of perspectives and with a variety of purposes. What is the lived experience of the polymath as opposed to the specialist, say, or the dilettante? What does the polymath represent in terms of our philosophical, historical understanding of human knowledge-making? How might polymathy function as a creative strategy, one capable of promoting disciplinary integration as well as groundbreaking innovations in thought and practice? These are questions of import, particularly the first, what is polymathy? I'll state for the record that according to the Oxford English Dictionary, polymath originated in English in the early 17th century to designate a person of wide knowledge or learning. Actually, Michael reminds me that the concept dates to ancient Greece. Since that time, since ancient Greece, or even 17th century England, the term has often been linked with Renaissance man and the idea, as expressed on Wikipedia, that the wide knowledge be used for some practical purpose. A polymath is a person whose expertise spans a significant number of different subject areas, known to draw on complex bodies of knowledge to solve specific problems. As panelists expand on this basic definition, and they will, listen for the implications they draw for personal identity, professional marginality, meaningful education, and creative preparation for the challenges of today and tomorrow. Our first panelist will be Angela Cotellessa. Angela completed her doctorate in human and organizational learning from George Washington University in 2018. Her doctoral dissertation was on the experiences of modern-day polymaths. She works for the federal government at the Center for Leadership Development, managing leadership development programs. Next up will be Michael Araki. Michael is trained in finance, management, and psychology, and maintains a lively interest in domains such as music, sports, and philosophy. He is currently working on the systemization of polymathy and is finishing a series of articles that explore the interface between creativity, entrepreneurial behavior, and corporate finance. Next up will be me. As an independent scholar associated with Michigan State University, my research focus is imaginative thinking and creative polymathy. With Bob Root-Bernstein, I am co-author of Sparks of Genius, the 13 thinking tools of the world's most creative people. I am also a haiku poet. Finally, Bob Root-Bernstein. Bob is a professor of physiology at Michigan State University who studies physiological control systems and autoimmune diseases, as well as science-arts interactions. In his spare time, he makes visual art, practices photography, and builds models. He is currently working on a book about artists as scientists. We'll take questions at the end of our presentations, or at the end of all of them. And now, Angela.
Good morning, everybody. As Michele said, my name is Dr. Angela Cotellessa. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about my doctoral dissertation, the research I did on modern-day polymaths. But first, I want to tell you why I decided to study that topic. So, I've had this question in me for a very long time. It seemed to me like the most important question I needed to ask myself. And that was, how can I live life well? And what does living well look like? I mean, that's what we're all doing here. We're living life for this game called life. How do we do it well? And the answer that came up for me was, it's these things: living life fully, including broadly, not narrowly, not living in a bubble, trying lots of things, seeing as much of the planet as I can, traveling, learning as much as possible, making a positive impact, contributing, being brave. I didn't want to live my life like a scared sheep, and reaching my fullest potential, self-actualization, being whole, being authentic, and living life with no regrets. And there's a quote here: life is meant to be experienced. Put yourself out there, do things you've never done, live a life where in the end you will have no regrets. And so when it came time for my doctoral, let me go back here. The society we live in tells us be a specialist. If you want to be successful in your career, pick one thing, not 2 or 3 things, and become very expert in that. So we become, in a way, cogs and little wheels. We may aspire to think outside of the box, but actually our disciplines frequently put us in a box and don't let us seek connections and build bridges to other fields. We become siloed. It's like an assembly line approach. I think this takes away from our humanity, which is why I wanted to study polymaths, because they seem to be daring curators of their own lives who don't simply exist in the box or become a cog in a wheel. So let me tell you a little bit about my study. I did a qualitative study using phenomenology. The purpose of phenomenology is to understand lived experience. And part of why I did that as well, what little amount of academic literature exists on polymathy looks at one polymath at a time frequently, not across finding themes and trends among groups. And it also typically looks at people from history, many of whom are dead. So I wanted to study real people, and not Leonardo da Vinci types, if they even exist nowadays. I wanted to study real, accomplished, but real people that you would know in your life, who are alive, and I wanted to look at trends among that group. In terms of the requirements for participation, they had to have expertise in both the arts and the sciences. They had to identify as being polymathic. The age requirement was 30 to 64, and they had to have native English fluency. Their first language didn't have to be English, but they had to be able to speak fluently, because that's the only language I speak fluently. I did 13 interviews. We focused on Mrs. Seidman's method, focusing on life history, details of the experience, and then the meaning making behind all of that. I did snowball sampling. I screened people. Some people didn't make the cut. There were 7 females, 6 males. Sorry, that should be 10 Americans and 3 Europeans, and the actual age range of participants was 30 to 56. And I used Moustakis' data analysis methods. These were my research questions. So I wanted to understand, what is the lived experience of polymaths? What does it feel like? What is it like being a polymath? How does it feel? How does polymathy impact creativity and creative problem solving? How did polymaths come to be that way? How did polymaths discover their identity? And what in a polymath environment impacted them becoming a polymath? So these are the themes. They're not my conclusions, but once I just took the data and clustered it into segments of meaning, categories of meaning, and subcategories, these are sort of just what the data pointed to. So in terms of development, this was an interesting theme. Financial resources and family upbringing can both hinder or promote polymathy. So it can promote polymathy for people who have money. They can travel, they can go to workshops, they can get degrees, and so having money can help someone become polymathic. But some of my participants also had the opposite, where they didn't have a lot of resources, so they had to be scrappy and creative, and they couldn't outsource things, so they had to figure it out and learn themselves. So that was an interesting theme I found. Also, I asked participants, do you think this is more nature or nurture in your case? I got a mix of both, but I heard from all of them that their polymathy and the excellence that they had achieved did require some level of effort, you know. In terms of their career, polymaths define themselves as highly creative experts across disparate disciplines. They have difficulty making career choices because, again, we live in a society that, we live in an age of specialization, and these are people that refuse to be specialists. Polymaths cannot be happy as narrow specialists. In terms of their identity, social identity theory says that we learn our identity because we find groups that we're in. So I'm a female, or I'm Caucasian, I have a doctorate, so I identify like that because I can sort of put myself in those categories because there are other people like that. But what I heard from polymaths is they realized that identity because they really couldn't feel comfortable in any one group, so they realized they were different, and that's how they got their identity as polymath. So that's kind of an interesting addendum. It's kind of in contrast to what social identity theory says, because there may be some identities that emerge from not being able to find a group. Being polymathic impacts one's social experiences, for sure, the storytelling, if I I say I'm polymathic, is it boasting, or is it too much info? Are people even going to believe this cobbled zigzag story of my life? So that was definitely something I heard from them. And I didn't ask about this, but some of my participants, even though they seem very confident, they're accomplished, they're movers and shakers, they're doing things in their lives, a significant number of the participants told me that they feel imposter syndrome. I didn't ask about that, but they brought it up. They said, because I'm not a specialist, when I'm comparing myself to specialists, I feel like a fake. I feel like I have imposter syndrome. So that was also interesting. Polymaths are voracious learners, of course. A lot of self-directed lifelong learning you see with polymaths. Can't separate learning from polymaths. And effective polymaths are time managers. They have to manage in order to be polymath, they have to manage their time and juggle lots of things. So conclusions. I'm going to go back to my research questions, and then I'm going to tell you the conclusions that answered the questions. So back to, what is the lived experience of polymaths? To be a polymath, one must accept not fitting in a box and perhaps even embodying apparent contradictions. Polymathy is being intrapersonally diverse. I want to emphasize this interpersonal diversity concept, by the way. When we think about diversity, we think about diversity in groups at the meso or macro levels. But diversity, I posit, can exist within a single individual. And this shows up in the gut microbiome. If you look in the literature, you'll find articles that say, for people who have more intrapersonal diversity in their guts, in that microbiome, they are healthier. So just like intrapersonal diversity can exist in the gut, I am saying intrapersonal diversity can exist in your personhood as well, and that would be by showing up as a polymath in the way that you live your life. All right, what is it like being a polymath? Polymaths are exposed broadly, they think creatively, they can build bridges and make connections across disparate fields, and they think strategically, and they're effective time managers. How does it feel to be a polymath? Being a polymath can make life richer, but it can also be quite difficult. This is what I heard from my participants. Because it's difficult because of the context in which we live that says organizations especially prefer specialists. So if you don't fit that mold, your life may be more difficult. How does polymathy impact creativity and creative problem solving? Actually, this is what I heard from polymaths was their greatest superpower. Because they have a very broad toolkit, they're able to come up with innovative solutions that wouldn't be possible if they were single disciplinary experts. I'm not saying that specialists cannot be creative. They can be creative in a certain kind of way within their silo, but polymaths can be creative and innovative in a different, unique way that can be quite impactful. How did polymaths come to be? Polymathy develops due to a combination of nature and nurture, I mentioned that earlier, and has been maintained through self-directed learning. I would say polymaths feel a compulsion to learn, in a way. How did polymaths discover their identity? I mentioned this, polymath identity is discovered from not fitting in. Polymath identity can be difficult to fully own and explain to others. What in a polymath's environment impacted them becoming a polymath? Family and financial resources impact the emergence of polymathy, and that could be because family was not supportive and they needed a ticket, they needed skills to get out, or their family was supportive and helped them explore. I think my time's up, right? So I'm going to skip through these slides and just end with this quote: "A mind that is stretched by new experiences can never go back to its old dimensions." Oliver Wendell Holmes. And here's my info, my email, Facebook group, YouTube channel, and website if you'd like to keep in touch. All right, thank you.
Hello. Hello everybody, my name is Michael Araki. I discovered the concept of polymathy 9 years ago, and at the moment I read it for the first time. By the way, it was in a book by Carl Sagan, the famous astronomer, and I felt it was such a strong, powerful concept, powerful idea. And then after that, I started my studies, advanced studies in the area. And when I took a look at the literature, scientific literature, I found almost nothing. Like, the field of polymathy studies was practically built regarding creativity studies by those people here. Robert, Michele. We have some other works by James Kaufman, Ronald Gero, Zorana Ivcevic, some another person, Bharath Siriraman, and that's all. And that's such a pity, that's such a strong, rich phenomenon and construct is not being represented in the scientific literature. So I took for me in my scientific endeavor, the job, let's say, to help systematize, help bring scientific rigor and inquiry to understand this great phenomenon that many people, it resonates with so many people in every field, in all areas, and they are not being backed up by us, the scientists, doing studies. So they are left like into this crazy world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, without the help of systematic work in this topic. So I think that's here, we here, psychologists, we have as our goal the idea to help people through systematic study. So that's such an important thing, and here's like a call I'm making to you. If you'd like to participate in that, we would be so glad to welcome you in this research area that's so important and has just started. And then my question is, what is this phenomenon of polymathy? How does it work? And then, to understand this phenomenon, we have to understand, when we make science, we need to build a map to understand reality. We need to use methods, but first, we have to define what you're going to study, what's the territory, what is polymathy. And I like philology. By the way, I should excuse for the title, I use syndrome, because in philology, syndrome means running together. So it doesn't mean that it's a disease, but it's a lot of things going together. And we, as scientists, we are used to very simple correlations, like one thing causes X causes Y, and then we have in life, especially in the life sciences, such interaction effects that if we don't appreciate them, we're gonna not have a good appreciation of how real phenomenon works. And anyway, polymathy comes from Greece. Poly is very much many, and mathy is such an interesting word. It means, or the verb mantano means to learn, but especially with inquiry. So that's another word that got lost in history. We don't have such a word nowadays to refer to knowledge that's acquired through inquiry. Okay, and then we can trace back this discussion to ancient Greece with the schools of philosophers like Pythagoras. And after the philosophy got more, how can I say, crystallized in the Hellenic world, the other authors and commentators found that were two types of people, the Mathematici and the Acusmatici. And this type of people here were like the scientists of that time, the people, the philosophers who inquired into the nature of the world with the rigor or the possible rigor of that time. And since they looked for rigor and they went to try to find proofs or to find to describe the world in a more systematic and precise way, and in the end, this thing became what we know today as mathematics, all right? And on the other hand, we had those kind of people who just listened and repeated the ideas, the Acusmatici. So polymathy through history changed, and in the Renaissance period, it became, the study of the trivium and quadrivium And not only that, the inquiry and the ability to understand the world. And one thing that's very important, since in the Renaissance period, this is from the 1600s, traveling, so having a bunch of different experiences. And then, through the analysis of the literature, I came with these categorizations of 6 types, and we have the passive polymathy, which is more about the acquisition of knowledge. Here is more semantic knowledge. Here is more episodic memories, lived experiences, experiential polymathy. This is the kind of polymathy that we had in the Renaissance, like knowing every genre of knowledge, which was the trivium and quadrivium. Okay, don't get me wrong. It's not every knowledge in the world. It's not every craft, every vocation. It's just what they considered the liberal arts and the real arts at that time. And we here are much more interested in the creative polymathy, which we have this avocational polymathy, when we have this mix of vocations and avocations, and we can create new things from that. Robert is and Michele are gonna talk about that more. And we have polymathy at the pro-C level, so people that are creative in their professions, but not necessarily Leonardo da Vinci's or Benjamin Franklin's or Goethe. So polymathy is not Leonardo da Vinci. It's a rich, complex phenomenon that is available for anyone. And then, to define polymathy, we arrived at these 3 dimensions. You must have breadth, of course. You cannot be a narrow specialist. You must also have depth. You cannot be superficial. If you're superficial, you are a dilettante, not a polymath. And integration is the key. I'm going to talk about that more. This is my provisional definition. I just put it here. I'm going to send you the slides, okay? And here is our development. And in the scientific inquiry, it's much easier to go into this. Okay, this is the 4 P's of creativity. Most of you are aware of that. But of course, it's much easier to study the product. And we have this, for example, stoichiometric studies by Simonton and others. But we have to inquire into the process or the person and how the press, for example, Angela talked about the environment, family, and having resources. How do these variables come together to make or not make a polymathic person? And here, integration is the key. And I love this story that Robert and Michele put in the book. A guy who could understand everything about book knowledge, but could not translate book knowledge to real life problems. So he knows all the equations for torque, but he didn't understand that to open a door, you are using the torque equations. So if you try to push a large door, a heavy door near the hinge, you cannot. You have to go further. That's integration, all right? You have the synergistic networks of enterprise, of many people, of some scientists. And we have integrative themes like Herbert Simon, that they're going to talk more about him, that can bring together many things into a single theme. That's a very famous strategy. And we have Angela's work here. But a warning, polymathy is not a bed of roses, okay? So it has benefits, but it has also costs. So some people are sometimes selling being polymath is going to solve all the problems. It is important, especially when you need innovation, creativity, get out of the box. But it has also some costs. We have to acknowledge that. This is the model this is the model I'm trying to advance. And it's over. And just one thing, the path to polymathy is not only one. You can be a polymathic person from different angles. And to finish here, I don't have time for that. But anyway, it's just a new tool I'm developing to measure trait polymathy, and then I can talk to you later. And here, what I would like to bring, I'm trying to integrate some studies. This is a study by Beatty and others. And I'm so puzzled that people are not using the prefrontal cortex, and that's something I think polymaths are more used to do. And we have this emotional connections, very interesting study by Stella and others. Okay, and here's my model. It's just for you to have here. I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to send you the slides later. And to finish, it's a very important phenomenon, and we are beginning to put our drops in motion. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'd like to begin with a working definition of my own. See, I told you there'd be a lot of definitions. Creative polymathy can be recognized as active engagement in multiple interests, mixing and integrating vocations with avocations, either simultaneously or serially, over the course of a lifetime. So let me unpack that understanding a bit. First, active engagement refers to productive activity. In other words, the making of ideas and things in a sustained and cognitively challenging manner. In his Nobel autobiographical statement, Douglas North, who got his Nobel in economics, called attention to the extra scholarly activities that have complemented research and enriched my life. Music, flying, fishing, hunting, and above all, photography. North loved listening to classical music, but as a listener only. The activity does not meet the threshold of actively making something. In contrast, North did actively make photographs throughout his life. Indeed, he felt himself to be a photographer in addition to being an economist. North had multiple interests, a signpost for polymathy. As Picasso and Beatrix Potter made clear, these multiple interests can be within or across domains. Picasso explored many forms of visual expression, including drawing, painting, printmaking, and sculpture. Potter developed committed interests in natural history, specifically the study of mushrooms, but also in art, in writing, and in pioneering land conservation. Potter pursued her interests as hobbies and then as professions. Winston Churchill also combined avocation with vocation. As a politician, he made the bulk of his living from writing. In middle age, he began to paint for pleasure, eventually at a level of achievement high enough to participate in numerous exhibitions, many of them anonymously. In his book, Painting as Pastime, he pronounced, "The cultivation of a hobby and new forms of interest is to be a policy of first importance to a public man." Churchill pursued his late blooming interest in painting while in and out of political office. Other polymaths also engage in serious pursuits, either seriously or simultaneously, or both. Gordon Parks, an American photographer of the mid-20th century, came to prominence as a photographer at Life magazine, then branched out into a concurrent career as journalist, poet, novelist, painter, musician, composer, and film director. After directing a film version of his autobiographical novel, The Learning Tree, he wrote, directed, and composed the music for Shaft, one of the first action films featuring a black protagonist. Neville Shute spent the first 20 years of his life as a mechanical engineer in aeronautical design. He began publishing novels under a pseudonym almost from the start, but only after leaving his engineering behind in middle age did he openly embrace a second career as a novelist. Indeed, Shute was best-selling authors throughout the 1950s and 60s. The 1957 post-apocalyptic On the Beach, his best-known novel, has been twice made into film. Now, if polymathy is a viable creative strategy, one would expect to find it prevalent among groups of creative individuals. And to that end, Bob and I have been assessing evidence for polymathy among Nobel Prize winners in all categories. Bob's work on scientists and their avocations demonstrated that Nobel Prize winners in the sciences, as well as U.S. National Academy of Sciences members and members of the U.S. Royal Society, are much more likely to be polymathic than the average scientists or U.S. citizens. This finding has recently hit the popular press, both in David Epstein's book Range and in a column by David Brooks just a couple of weeks ago, citing Epstein, citing Bob. Compared to other scientists, Nobel laureates are at least 22 times more likely to partake as an amateur actor, dancer, magician, or other type of performer. To complement this data, Bob and I have completed a study of Nobel Prize winners in all categories through the year 2008. We tracked interests not just in arts and crafts, but in 5 additional fields or domains: writing, particularly artistic writing, humanities and social sciences, nature immersion, and sports. You can note that each Nobel group displays interests in fields beyond those closely associated with their prize-winning disciplines. In fact, for instance, the literature Nobels in red dominate in artistic writing, as expected, but also in the humanities. They have noticeable interest too in the arts and to a lesser extent in science. Physicists in blue, along with chemists in light green and physiologists in dark green. They dominate in science interests, but economists in purple also have an outsized interest in science, as well as in the humanities and social sciences. What I'd like to pick up on now is the incidence of inter- or cross-domain interests among Nobel laureates. This figure displays the percentage of laureates with interests in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 domains, with a peak point for physics and physiologists, doctors, or physiologists laureates in one domain. Their peak is at one domain. Peace laureates peak at 2 domains, and chemists, economists, and literature laureates peak at 3 domains. In no case do laureates with a single interest domain predominate. Trans or cross-domain polymathy clearly characterizes most Nobel Prize winners. So let me throw in a few examples. Gao Xingjiang, he is as much a painter as a writer. For the Nobel Prize, he earned most of his living from his works as an artist, with over 30 international ink-wash painting exhibitions, and he continues to ply both vocations. Maurice Allais, trained in the sciences and engineering, in addition to his career in economics, he maintained simultaneous parallel interests or careers, his words, in physics and history. He received honors for his experimental research into gravity and gravity anomalies, in addition to his original and independent discoveries in economics. He also devoted himself to writing a history of civilizations that was never published. Fridtjof Nansen was a great athlete in his youth. He won the Norwegian skating championship, broke world speed skating records, and won annual cross-country skiing race for 11 years straight. He used these skills in the polar expeditions undertaken as an explorer and scientist, and he parlayed his expeditionary prominence into diplomatic peace initiatives that won him the Nobel Prize. He also drew and painted avocationally. Next, Dorothy Crowfoot Hodgkin, pioneer in X-ray crystallography, was an avocational artist throughout her life. Vocational, if you count the artifact drawings she executed for her parents when she was a teen. Not only did she decipher the protein structure of insulin, she painted it. Nobel laureates are likely to be cross-domain polymaths. They are also, as a group, likely to be intra- or within-domain polymaths. 54 to 84% have 2 or more interests within their professional domain, circled in red. Additionally, each group displays multiple interests within other non-professional domains. For instance, 37% of economists have 2 or more interests in science. Bob and I also determined the number of laureates who engaged in multiple genres within the home domain and in 1 or more extra-professional domains. Circled in red, 68% of economics laureates and 82% of literature laureates display 2 or more developed interests in their home domain, as well as interests in 2 or more extra domains or additional domains. Circled in green, 48 to 54% of science Nobels and peace Nobels along with them display those kinds of polymathy. Rabindranath Tagore makes a good exemplar of within and across domain polymathy. Within literature, there was hardly a genre that Tagore did not exploit. He was playwright, poet, essayist, short story writer, and novelist. In addition, he displayed wide-ranging, cross-domain interests in the arts and humanities. He wrote and performed over 1,000 songs. He took up painting to wide acclaim. He set up a school still in operation today and developed its curriculum. Clearly, he excelled in multiple overlapping worlds. Finally, our working definition suggests that creative polymathy depends on the integration or synthesis of wide-ranging interests. Herb Simon, for instance, was often hailed as a Renaissance man, and not only because of his wide-ranging knowledge and contributions to artificial intelligence, decision science, mathematics, cognitive psychology, political science, philosophy, and economics. Significantly enough, Simon also devoted himself to as many hobbies as he did fields of academic interest, integrating them within overall purposes. These avocations included chess, piano playing, musical composition, drawing, and painting. Each one became grist for his mill, which was understanding the cognitive foundations of decision-making. Quote, "I can rationalize any activity I engage in as simply another form of research on cognition. I can always view my hobbies as part of my research," end quote. And to view all activities as part of one grand whole was in fact the point. Simon consciously integrated his multiple interests and activities into a singular focus. The Renaissance mind, he argued, is not broader than other intelligent minds, but happens to cover a narrow swathe across the multidimensional space of knowledge. In his case, the controlling purpose or problem was decision-making. And in his case, as in others, avocational polymathy became a deliberate strategy for maximizing the potential for creative success. In conclusion, the kind of polymathy that concerns us here supposes active engagement in more than one discipline or domain. Individuals working at the highest levels in the arts, sciences, and humanities are often polymaths. 50% and more of Nobel laureates have interests across and within domains. Polymathic integration within and across domains can be a deliberate creative strategy. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on what Michelle's been talking about and take it in slightly different directions. First, I'm going to talk about polymathic curiosity as possibly a trait that most polymaths share. Integrated networks of enterprise, which really addresses the issue of how people integrate all their ideas. Polymathic interests across the different intra and cross-domain or trans-domain ideas, which Michelle already introduced to you, and then the idea that polymaths are ambicerebral, which I will define when I get there. All right, so I want to start out with just an introduction to a study which I followed up on when I was quite young, about 30 years ago. There was a psychologist named Bernice Ideson who was the first person to ever do a longitudinal study of scientists. She got 40 scientists who agreed to take a whole series of psychological tests. They followed their various publications, the impact, how many prizes they got, all sorts of different things. Every 5 years they would do these studies, correlate all the different things. The study lasted over 30 years. And at some point, unfortunately, Bernice died. My mother and I took over the project and watched these 40 people. Now, it's a very interesting group because 11 of the people in the group ended up in the National Academy of Sciences. 4 of them got Nobel Prizes. The rest had fairly average careers, except for 3 that didn't even get tenure. So we have a very diverse group, and we tried to get a sense of what differentiated the very successful people from those who weren't as successful. So one of the things we found was that the most successful were much more curious in a number of ways that we could measure than were the people who were not very successful or had very average careers. This fits with a lot of literature that's already out there, obviously, in the psychological field. The creative people tend to be more open to novel ideas, novel activities than is the typical person. Just to give you some idea of the actual data, rather than give you statistics, here are the people in the lowest quartile in terms of being successful. Almost all of them said things like, creativity is allied to hard work, which is why I spend so much time reading. I didn't want to work hard. I don't try specifically to develop hobbies. I'd say work is its own reward. Almost all of these people, Angela mentioned time management earlier, said that if only they worked 14 hours a day, they would be more successful. I will tell you in a little bit in advance before I show you the next group, or the most successful. All of the people in the highest success group said, I'm a lazy son of a bitch. It's almost a direct quote from someone. They weren't, of course, but they realized that hard work was not necessarily the way to be creative. I believe in a balanced life. That's not a good thing in this particular case. Here are some quotes from the top quartile people. I was always almost interested in anything. I'm always taking things apart, putting them together. I have a big tendency to use my hands. I also have a tendency to use my intellect. Sciences are a great way of putting these things together, so forth and so on. So these are illustrating what Michele was talking about. The people are integrating their various interests. They don't see the things that they do outside of their profession as drawing away from their activity or their creativity, but actually promoting it. An example here from one of the Nobel Prize winners who was not in the group, but just to show us that it's generalizable, Christiane Bohlhard. She has done all sorts of things. It says very specifically that what she thinks makes her creative is her very wide-ranging curiosity. She likes to do everything. She paints and actually illustrates all of her own works. Lower right there, she plays the flute at a semi-professional level. She has her own cookbook, which is a bestseller in Germany right now. It's been on the bestseller list for about 5 years. She designs her own fiendishly difficult puzzles and sells those, and that's all in addition to the work she's doing as an embryologist. So curiosity is very important. Michele mentioned that not only do you have to have the curiosity, you need to integrate it. So it turns out that many people have noticed this in the past. Dewey mentioned integrative activity sets. Howard Gruber, who studied the creativity of Charles Darwin, called these networks of enterprise. I was doing a study of scientists. I ended up calling them correlative talents, different talents that melded together in some way. I didn't realize these other people had actually already done these studies until later. Obviously, we were all onto the same kinds of things, so Michele and I now like to talk about integrated networks of enterprise as sort of a way of taking all those terms and putting them together. Just to give you some examples of how Nobel Prize winners in the sciences have done this. Alexis Carrel got his Nobel Prize in 1912 for developing the ways that you could do stitching for major organ transplants. He actually adapted that directly from lace making, which he learned from his mother and then took professional lessons in. And the techniques are a direct translation. Alexander Fleming actually discovered penicillin while he was making microbial art. He happened to notice that some of his beautiful fungi, which had blue-green colors, intersected and killed off some of the bacteria he was growing. And so he was taking an artistic hobby, which was obviously pretty bizarre, playing around in the lab and noticing things that nobody else could possibly have noticed. Some more recent people, Konstantin Novoselov, got his Nobel Prize in physics. He directly addresses the issue of were we doing physics? And he says, well, I'm not even clear I'm really doing physics. It's not even clear I'm really doing science in the broadest sense. The way we made the discovery was simply be curious. And every Friday afternoon, they would basically just, let's go think about the craziest thing we can and see whether we can actually do something about it. That's just pure curiosity. You know, they actually developed this into a strategy. All right, so polymathy can involve, as Michelle said, multiple locations or applications and melding them in some way. So some people are trans-domain, as she said, and some people are intra-domain. You can see Fleming as a case in point, trans-domain, Novoselav as intra-domain, just doing science across all the different ways you can do it. Again, some examples here, very specifically, Gertrude Elion won her Nobel Prize in medicine for developing strategies for developing drugs. She developed about 8 different classes of drugs which are now used in their bestsellers. She was actually one of the most productive drug developers ever in the entire history of the world. She started out in organic chemistry, as you might expect, found that wasn't sufficient to address the problem, so she learned biochemistry, realized that wasn't enough, so she went into pharmacology, but that wasn't enough because she needed to address problems in the immune system. She developed transplant drugs and drugs for HIV, so she had to learn immunology, and it goes on and on. This is extremely unusual for a scientist. We've actually done studies that show that most scientists stay directly in the field when they get their PhD. Another example, Walter Gilbert developed many of the techniques we use for modern molecular biology. He got a Nobel Prize for that. Started out actually as a physicist, then turned into a biophysicist, then a biochemist, a molecular biologist. He ended up spinning off his own companies, became an entrepreneur. He now self-identifies as a photographer. Francis Arnold, another example, started out as a mechanical aerospace engineer, ends up in molecular biology. Again, I need to emphasize how unusual this is. So going back to Idason's study, which when we did all the interviews of her people, one of the, again, differences we saw between the people who were fairly average in their careers and the people who were extremely successful is that the average person believed in the two cultures, that there are the artists and there are the scientists and there are the social people and so forth. These are all different people who can't communicate. Without exception, all the people who got into the National Academy and won Nobel Prizes said there is no such thing as two cultures, we do it all. And that, it just dropped right out of the interviews without anybody even really looking at it. What I want to end by saying is basically that what these people are telling us is what Nobel Prize winner Roger Sperry tried to tell us. He's the one who did all the split brain research, and almost everybody runs around and now talks about right brain people and left brain people, and creativity's on one side and rationality's on the other, and so forth and so on. But what you have to remember is that Roger Sperry said in a normal brain you are not split. And in fact, everybody is a whole brain person. He called this ambicerebral, that you are using both sides of your brain at the same time, and the people who we're looking at as polymaths are the ones who are integrating that most completely. Right, so that's the end of my talk. Thank you. I'm going to do is just make really quickly 2 quick slides to give you some idea of where we think this field may be going. Michael, in his talk, has tried to get people excited about this. We're all very excited about this field. There are a huge number of people who are starting to get into this. Dean Simonton, James Kaufman, Ron Bagetto, Adam Kaplan, Scott Barry Kaufman are some of the big names you may recognize who are now beginning to work in this area. We think that's really exciting to have more people doing it. Some of the key questions that really haven't been addressed yet are things like, what's the relationship between polymathy and versatility? Are they the same thing? Are they different things? A lot of the answer is going to come down to process versus products. Do you have to have proven that you can succeed at a very high level to be a polymath? And is that the difference between being a polymath and simply versatile? You have lots of training, but you haven't demonstrated it yet. So you have to be versatile before you can become a polymath, or are they really the same thing? Is it combinatorial? The more things that you know, does that increase the probability of your creativity? Or is there some point where you know so much that you can't see the connections anymore and it becomes a negative thing? Is it a personality? Is this something that people are born with this tendency? Or is this something we could actually be training people to do? That's two very, very different ways of looking at things. Or is this like a talent? We all have this talent, and we need to develop it, those kinds of things. I think what Angela mentioned, lots of the polymaths are self-learners. Is that a requirement? Does everybody become who becomes a polymath become an autodidact because there's no way to get the training that you need? Or do you actually need that formal training to succeed in our institutional areas these days? The 10,000 hour rule for mastering something would suggest polymaths really are going to have difficulty existing. How did somebody like a Leonardo da Vinci manage to master so many different areas if it takes 10,000 hours for each of them? Or is there a way to get past that and make it quicker? And a question we really haven't done any research on is handicaps. Not everybody can do everything. Does what you can't do actually force you into areas where you are more talented? And does that somehow direct how you become a polymath? And finally, I just want to mention quickly that there are a number of universities and other institutions starting to have formal programs. So that's also exciting because, again, Angela mentioned that without institutional support, it's difficult for polymaths to exist. It's also going to be difficult to do the research, as we found, and all of us have found in the past. With that institutional support and the growth in it, there are real opportunities. So, thank you. We'll take questions now for anybody, and I think we have maybe 2 minutes to do that, but thank you very much. Any questions, or you can just come up? I guess we can just, let's do it. Go ahead.
So there's a thrust of interest in interdisciplinary research, and I just wondered if you could comment on that, because to do interdisciplinary research, you want to understand deeply two disciplines, to be able to communicate in two different languages in some ways. But we don't think of that in terms of Polymath. And I just wondered if you could comment on that.
So, I mean, very quickly, one of the questions that has to be addressed really is, what do we mean by interdisciplinary? So I was actually trained in history of science, and one of the reasons I did that is I thought I'd be able to take history and I'd be able to take science and put them together. I only discovered when I got into the field that history of science is not interdisciplinary, or it is by terms, but it means between. It's not a combination. So there's a difference between transdisciplinary, things that go across things that are integrative, and their own specialty fields. And many times these terms are used interchangeably. All of them probably relate to polymathy in some ways. Some of them are addressing the issue of taking different fields and putting them together. So as a historian, I had to learn how to use historical methods to address a scientific or a scientist doing their work or a scientific institution. I did have to learn different languages and learn how to talk to different groups. I actually studied with Thomas Kuhn, who gave us a lecture. The very first lecture he gave in every class was, here are the two languages. Here's how a scientist reads a paper. Here's how a historian reads a paper. And they're actually very different methods, and they're going to use different terms. So addressing that issue of terminology or methodology is certainly critical. How that all folds into polymathy is, I think, an open question at this point, and maybe that's where the polymath programs and institutions are starting to develop. They'll have to address things. So it's a good question.
Right, thank you. I think we must stand here, right? Okay, thank you very much. You can ask questions to us, and we are very happy to talk to you. Thank you very much for your presence.